Okay, so as you can see, we are going to now look at an argument that was included in your reading, and it's the generic argument for skepticism. As you can see, the argument is partially clarified. You see that these statements have been separated, or that each you can see that each line, which is indicated with a number, is a statement. So there are no statements in the same line. You do see some numbering going on. What we're going to do is we're going to highlight really important concepts, and we are going to finish clarifying the argument, if you will. So let's just do a quick review so that we can do that. And know that you may need this information for this task that you're working on right now, for a writing task in the same week, or maybe later in the semester. So I am referring to the notes that you took back in Unit 1, so days 4, 5. Here we went over the definition for clarify, the definitions later, but it's the same information, the formatting principles and the content principles for clarifying arguments. But just very briefly, since it's been a while since we've clarified any arguments and taken any quizzes, let's just very briefly review what it means to clarify an argument. Let's remember that a clarifying argument is one in which the essential logical features of an argument's core have been made explicit. Okay, so that's the definition. And you'll remember that there are basically two phases to clarifying an argument. And so one is marking up the passage, and then second passage, we are doing things like crossing out excess verbiage. I think that's basically it. If the statement's already numbered, then obviously you do not need to number the statements within the passage. Now this is a little bit different because in this argument, it's been partially clarified. Remember that when you're reformatting, when you get to the reformatting stage of clarifying an original argument that's already in paragraph form, that you have to separate each statement onto its own line. So of course you've got to remember the definition for a statement and not use the everyday notion of a statement, but the logic definition for statement. Remember that you have to label statements that are functioning as premises with the P at the beginning, that you number only premises. If you have a complex argument, you don't number the conclusions, but you got to make sure I know which one's an F, a final conclusion and a sub-conclusion. And remember that I said in this class, the final conclusion's always going to come last when it comes to arguments that I present to you in some form or fashion. So what we're going to do is we're going to work with this, and we're going to mark this up because it's not completely clarified. So this is kind of an in-between stage in terms of what we had been doing in class, which is working on an argument in paragraph form and then reformatting. Partially formatted according to our conventions, but there's still some markup we can do. So we're going to go ahead and do that. I'm not going to actually write the answers because I want to make sure that you're listening. I'll be pointing to with my marker what we would need to do to correctly mark this up. But the other thing that I want to do is highlight key concepts and words that we would sentence or the first statement in this argument. There are two words that I'm looking at that name fundamental and powerful concepts that you have been reading about and thinking about since we began Unit 4. What do you think is the first word that I would put a triangle over in this sentence? Doubt, right? Because skeptics try to cast doubt on our beliefs, and once they do that, they think that they do not count as knowledge, not as we've defined it. And of course, the other key word is what? Beliefs. So if we were in class, we would be putting, or if this was a collaborative assignment, which it would have been if this was face-to-face, you would have put a triangle over doubting and over beliefs. Okay, so now let's look at what comes next. It follows that we can doubt all our beliefs. So again, what two words do you see occurring in this statement here, which turns out to be the sub-conclusion? Based on these reasons, using these concepts of doubting and beliefs, what conclusion or sub-conclusion is drawn by the skeptic? It follows that we can doubt all our beliefs. And so, of course, again, we see the words naming the key concepts here in the reasoning, what? Doubt and belief. Notice that the premises are making use of the key terms and words that are going to be used in the conclusion. So next in the reasoning, we see if we can doubt all of our beliefs, then we cannot be certain of any of them. So again, which two words in the if part of this conditional would we want to have triangles over? Doubt and beliefs. What about in the then part? We cannot be certain of any of them. Of course, we would want to put a triangle over certain. All right, now notice if we were when we reformat this argument, we are going to want to employ uniform language, and so them would be replaced with what? Beliefs. Okay, and we'll get more into that in a minute. Next, in the reasoning, we see if we do not have any certainty about any of our beliefs, or if we do not have certainty about any of our beliefs, then we do not have knowledge. So in the if part of the statement, what are the two words again that we would put triangles over? Certainty and beliefs. And what about in the then part? Knowledge. So you can see that the skeptic so far is using the concepts of doubt and beliefs. Then they bring in this notion of certainty, and then they connect that to knowledge. And so I'm hoping that you're seeing more clearly than before when you first read this, how the concepts are being linked together from one statement to the next to form the reasoning. So we're doing both conceptual engineering, we're looking at the concepts being used and how they're linked together from one statement to the next to practice intellectual empathy, theoretical intellectual empathy. We're trying to see how the skeptic gets from their reasons to their conclusions using their concepts as they do. Now for statement 5, we've got therefore we do not have any knowledge, and of course the core word is there. The core word there is what? Knowledge. So you'd have a triangle over the word knowledge. All right, so notice how the skeptic begins with, the mere fact that we might doubt a belief, how they get from those two concepts to what? The idea that we don't have any knowledge. And of course, if this means we don't have any knowledge whatsoever, are we talking about limited skepticism or universal skepticism? This argument does seem to suggest that we are dealing with a universal skeptic. Now, let's say you're a skeptic about religious belief. I'm just using that as an example. You can substitute the word science if you want to. So we could say if we can find reasons for doubting, in fact, actually, let's use social media just for fun. We can find reasons for doubting our beliefs based on social media. So I'm just giving you an example of how you could use this argument as a limited skeptic. It follows that we can doubt all beliefs based on social media. If we can doubt all of our beliefs based on social media, then we cannot be certain about any of the beliefs we form from social media. If we do not have certainty about any of our beliefs from social media, then we do not have any knowledge from social media. Therefore, we do not have knowledge from social media. That's an interesting way to think about it, and to also think about COVID-19 beliefs. Can we find reason for doubting any of our COVID-19 beliefs? Any of our beliefs about what the government is doing? Any beliefs about where it came from? Should we then, from the idea that we can find a reason to doubt a belief about the government and what it knows about COVID-19, about the virus itself, how it originated, or whatnot, should we from then, or how might the skeptic go from there to claiming that we don't have any knowledge about COVID-19? There's all kinds of interesting stuff. I've been arguing with a lot of people on Facebook, interestingly enough, and I have Facebook friends from all different persuasions, different religions, and different political affiliations, and lots of stuff going on there. But anyway, okay, so that's an interesting point. Okay, so now we're going to go ahead and mark this up. So we've done our conceptual focus, right? We've looked at the concepts, the beginning concepts, and then how those are linked together to get to the conclusion in the statement. Like I said, if we were in class or we were doing a collaborative assignment, you would have put triangles over words naming the fundamental and powerful concepts in this reasoning, and you would have done so each time. All right, so now we're gonna treat this as the in-between stage. So we would, in theory, mark this up, but I'm not gonna actually mark it up. I'm gonna talk about what would be marked up. So obviously, when we are, let's first of all see if we need to eliminate any excess verbiage. And we'll worry about labeling in a minute. So in this first statement, there's no excess verbiage. But what about to? Well, it follows is a wonderful conclusion indicator, and I love to see premise and conclusion indicators when you give me arguments in the form of paragraphs. Remember that when we're clarifying arguments, we have conventions to make what's going on with the argument very clear. So I might backtrack a little bit and say, let's go ahead and label our statements as premises or conclusions. It follows that typically tells us that what is coming, a premise or a conclusion, a conclusion. Now, as it turns out, you can see the word therefore down here. So we know that there's another conclusion, And like I said, I'll always give you the final conclusion last, but even your analysis of this shows that this really is the final conclusion, the one towards which all others are aiming. So what we want to do is, in marking up the original argument, this is what we're calling the original argument here, or the partially clarified argument, we would cross out 3 words here. It follows that. We would then capitalize the word we. We would then put a P in front of 1, right, for P1, and then we cross out 2. Why? Why would we cross out the number 2? Because we do not number conclusions. But what we would need to write is, would it be enough to write C next to the number 2, next to we can doubt? No, we would write SC. So you would have a P here, and then directly here you would have FC. You will have crossed out the number 2. It follows that, capitalized we. Okay, so as you can see, they are not done with their reasoning, right? So basically they're using, they use 1 to advance statement 2, and then once statement 2 has been established, it is then used as a premise along with what? Statement 3 and statement 4, that's statements 2 through 4, are then used to argue for this final conclusion. In other words, statements 2, 3, and statement 2 is taken to be established from the first statement, a premise, then that statement 2 becomes itself a premise. It's first a conclusion, then it's a premise, and it's used with 2, 3, and 4 to claim that 5 is true. So do we have any excess verbiage in here? Nope, nope. Remember what I told you about. This is in the lecture notes that I previewed to you earlier on notebook paper. Remember, if-then statements are conditionals, and we never do what with them? We never chop them in half. A lot of times students end up creating sentence fragments, or they end up trying to create the if part as just a regular statement itself, and the then part as its own statement. Furthermore, they may leave those two fabrications in the same line, and you're not supposed to do that when you're reformatting. Now, of course, since this would be P1, this is subconclusion, then you'd cross out the numbers 3, 4, and 5, and you would write P2 here, P3 here, and here, not only would you cross out 5, but what else would you cross out? The word therefore, and what would you capitalize? The W in we. And then you would label this as just with C, conclusion? No, you would label this as the final conclusion, and FC, and you should have those notes. I haven't pulled them out, but you should have some day 8 lecture notes where I went over how you label arguments, the statements in an argument when the argument is a complex argument. So basically what you have here from the book is a complex argument that is indicative of the generic argument for skepticism, in this case universal skepticism. A little bit earlier in the lecture I did show you how you could use this form of the argument as a limited skeptic to claim that maybe there are just certain kinds or types of knowledge that we might not have. So you could use this to argue that we don't have maybe knowledge from science or knowledge from religion. So you could say we can find we can find reasons for doubting any one of our beliefs from knowledge or from science. And then you would just go in systematically using those same words. Okay, so at this point, we will have marked up the argument. Like I said, I'm not writing it because I want to make sure you're listening to the lecture, but hopefully you're taking good notes. And then we want to reformat it. And so remember, this part counts for 80 to 90% of clarifying. But then you go down here, or you go below it, and then you reformat it. Now, this already is partially reformatted. So all of the statements are isolated. They're already on their own row. We have already labeled them. We've already got the sub-conclusions and the final conclusion in the correct place. We're not moving the sub-conclusion to here. Why? Because 2, 3, and 4 are not being used to support this one. Or I should say, when we renumber these, premise 2 and premise 3 are not being given in support of the sub-conclusion. It's premise 1 that's being given in support of the sub-conclusion. That's why we keep this statement here. But then it's these 3 being used together to support statement 5, and of course 5 is the one towards which all others aim. So the only thing that we would really have to do then is, so let's say you've marked this up, then you copy and paste it so that you can finish the work. The final version then would have all of the labels correct, all of the numbers correct, all of the stuff that we crossed out would be gone, proper punctuation would be used. But don't forget that you would need to apply uniform language to at least one word, right? Them, okay? So if I have you clarify this argument, including the passage markup and the reformatting, or the finishing the technical work here, remember that you do have notes about the formatting conventions. Like I said, some of that work has already been done here. One thing I need to show you very quickly is how to mark up a passage in Blackboard when you're doing a review. So I'm going to have to make a separate video for that, and I will do that so that you have the tools that you need.